Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. If you spend enough time listening to conversations inside Washington think tanks, media circles, or elite political gatherings, you might come away with a particular impression. You might hear that a certain kind of conservatism, often described as respectable, principled, or institutional, is finally making a comeback. Some say it already has, others say it's just around the corner. And when people talk about this supposed revival, one name tends to come up again and again: former Vice President Mike Pence. According to this narrative, Pence represents a return to a more traditional Republican Party, one grounded in moral clarity, constitutional norms, and a less confrontational political style. In this telling, the Trump era is either fading or overdue to be replaced by something calmer, more polished, and more acceptable to elite institutions. But how much truth is there to this idea? Is the American right really undergoing a major ideological reorganization? Or are we simply seeing another chapter in a long-running debate about Donald Trump's role in conservative politics? Today, I want to take a step back and look at this question from a neutral, analytical perspective, without cheering for either side and without dismissing legitimate disagreements. Because what's really happening here isn't just about Mike Pence or Donald Trump. It's about a deeper divide inside American conservatism, one that's been unresolved for nearly a decade. The argument for a conservative reset often begins with institutional developments. In recent years, a small group of staffers left the Heritage Foundation, one of the most influential conservative think tanks in Washington, and moved to organizations aligned with Mike Pence, including Advancing American Freedom, a group Pence founded after leaving office. Some commentators interpreted this shift as evidence of a broader ideological realignment, a move away from Trump-style populism and toward a more traditional, values-based conservatism. In media coverage and opinion columns, this development was sometimes framed as the early stages of a conservative reorganization, a signal that the right was preparing for a post-Trump future. But critics of this interpretation argue that the significance of these moves has been overstated. From their perspective, a relatively small number of personnel changes inside Washington institutions do not necessarily translate into meaningful political momentum, especially in a party where grassroots voters, not think tanks, ultimately determine electoral outcomes. This disagreement highlights a recurring tension in American politics: the gap between elite discourse and voter behavior. Mike Pence occupies a unique position in modern Republican history. He is widely seen as a disciplined, morally serious figure, a politician who emphasizes faith, constitutional order, and traditional conservative values. For supporters of respectable conservatism, Pence represents continuity with an older Republican tradition. However, when evaluating his political influence, it's important to separate symbolism from electoral reality. Pence's 2024 presidential campaign offers a useful case study. The campaign launched in June 2023 and ended quietly just a few months later, without a major breakthrough in polling, fundraising, or public engagement. It struggled to gain traction with Republican voters, many of whom remained firmly aligned with Donald Trump or were drawn to other candidates. From a neutral standpoint, this outcome raises an important question: if respectable conservatism truly represents the future of the party, why has it struggled to translate into broad voter support? Supporters might argue that Pence's campaign was undermined by structural factors, timing, media dynamics, or Trump's continued dominance. Critics, on the other hand, suggest that the campaign revealed a deeper disconnect between elite conservative ideals and the priorities of today's Republican base. Any discussion of the American right inevitably returns to Donald Trump. Since announcing his first presidential run in 2015, Trump has been declared politically finished more times than most observers can count. Each time he has defied expectations, winning elections, dominating primaries, or reshaping the party's agenda. This pattern has created a sense of fatigue among voters, who are repeatedly told that Trump's influence is about to collapse. only to see him remain central to Republican politics. From one perspective, Trump represents a fundamental break from traditional conservatism, a movement defined by populism, confrontational rhetoric, and skepticism toward institutions. From another perspective, he represents a continuation of long-standing conservative priorities, reframed in a more direct and aggressive style. What's clear is that Trump's political relevance cannot be dismissed as an illusion created by media hype. His support base remains substantial, and his policy agenda continues to shape the Republican Party's direction. One reason Trump remains influential is that his supporters point to tangible policy outcomes. During his current term, Trump has pursued a series of initiatives that align with his campaign promises: stricter border enforcement, reductions in illegal immigration, administrative reforms targeting DA programs, and efforts to reshape federal agencies like the Department of Education and the EPA. Supporters argue that these actions demonstrate a results-oriented approach to governance, one focused on enforcement and structural change rather than rhetorical consensus. On economic issues, Trump's administration emphasizes energy production, foreign investing, manufacturing. Recent economic indicators, including GDP growth, inflation levels, and energy prices, are frequently cited as evidence that these policies are producing measurable outcomes. Crime policy offers another example of contrast. The decision to deploy National Guard units to cities facing high levels of violence sparked controversy. But supporters argue that subsequent declines in violent crime validate the approach. Critics, of course, dispute these interpretations, raising concerns about long-term institutional norms, civil liberties, and diplomatic relationships. From a neutral standpoint, the key point is this: Trump's appeal is reinforced not only by rhetoric, but by a perception among many voters that his administration is actively doing things, whether one agrees with those actions or not. Trump's foreign policy style further illustrates the divide between respectable and populist conservatism. Traditional conservatives often emphasize alliances, diplomatic norms, and institutional cooperation. Trump, by contrast, favors transactional relationships and blunt public criticism, particularly toward European allies. Supporters argue that this approach forces uncomfortable but necessary conversations about defense spending, censorship, and immigration policies in allied countries. Critics argue that it damages trust and weakens long-term partnerships. Again, the disagreement is less about facts than about priorities. Is effectiveness best measured by diplomatic tone or by concrete outcomes? One of the most persistent themes in this debate is the disconnect between elite commentary and voter sentiment. Inside media and policy circles, discussions often focus on tone norms and institutional credibility. Among voters, concerns tend to center on cost of living, public safety, immigration, and economic stability. This gap helps explain why calls for a return to respectable conservatism resonate strongly in elite spaces, but struggle to gain traction at the ballot box. It's not necessarily that voters reject civility or principle, but rather that they prioritize outcomes over presentation. So, is the American right undergoing a major transformation? At this stage, the evidence suggests something more incremental. There is a genuine debate within conservatism about style, strategy, and long-term direction. There are voters and intellectuals who want a post-Trump identity, and others who believe Trump remains the most effective vehicle for their priorities. What we are not seeing, at least not yet, is a decisive shift away from Trump-style politics, driven by figures like Mike Pence. That doesn't mean such a shift is impossible. Political movements evolve over time, leadership changes, coalitions realign, but for now, the balance of influence remains clear. The idea of a revived respectable conservatism is appealing to many Americans who are exhausted by political conflict and polarization. It offers a vision of stability, decorum, and institutional continuity. At the same time, Donald Trump's continued dominance reflects a different reality. one shaped by voter frustration, distrust of elites, and a demand for visible action. Rather than viewing this as a simple battle between good and bad actors, it may be more accurate to see it as a reflection of competing priorities within the same political coalition. One side emphasizes tone, tradition, and moral clarity. The other emphasizes outcomes, disruption, and confrontation with existing systems. For now, these two visions continue to coexist uneasily within American conservatism, and until one of them clearly demonstrates broader public support, the debate is likely to continue.